There are certain cities that have railways as part of their fundamental history, and which are part of the history of railways as well. Paris, Tokyo, London, and definitely Philadelphia. Philly can only be described as a crazy rail city, with tons of different lines, tons of different trains, and all kinds of services running around it. Coordinated and interconnected in a way that so few cities manage to achieve. I actually haven't talked a lot about Philly on this channel, and that's because it has its own transit YouTuber, Alan Fisher, of course. Alan has helped me a lot with this video, which I do have to make because Philly is such a juggernaut in the railway space. So without further ado, let's talk about the fantastically interconnected transit of Philly, from trolleys to subways to interurbans and of course suburban trains. Welcome to RM Transit, a channel about the world's great railway metropolises and how they work. Consider supporting me on Patreon so I can bring you more videos. Like many great railway cities, Philadelphia has a substantial subway network which connects urban parts of the region that are underserved by mainline railways as well as lighter modes like trams. And these lines are, like most lines in Philly, operated by SEPTA, the Southeastern Pennsylvania Transportation Authority. Philadelphia has 3 different rapid transit lines in the conventional sense. There's the Broad Street Subway, a standard gauge line powered by 600-volt DC third rail, which runs north-south under Broad Street across a huge swath of the city, covering 20 kilometers with 25 stations and being particularly important in South Philadelphia where it covers areas that aren't served by other rail options and connects to NRG Stadium. What's rather unique about the Broad Street line is that a huge chunk of it from the north end to south of Center City is quad track, enabling both local and express subway service just like you see in New York. And the trains are huge as well, at 3 meters wide and up to 10 cars or 200 meters long, similar in length to those on London's Elizabeth line. Those big trains and quad tracks mean that the Broad Street line has gargantuan capacity, and it's even had 24-hour service historically, as with lines in New York. And because the line already has various pre-prepared spurs and flyovers, all kinds of branches have been talked about over the years. There's also a more recent plan to extend the line south to the major redevelopment of the Philly Navy Yard. The extension that's got the most attention over the years, and especially in recent years, is up Roosevelt Boulevard on the north end, which could be tied into the Broad Street trunk and really fill a gap in service in the northeast of the city. And it could all actually be built for quite low cost since Roosevelt Boulevard has a wide median where you could do an elevated structure or cut and cover construction. This and other expansion would obviously be great, because it would help transform the Broad Street line into its own transit system that could easily move millions of riders a day all on its own, albeit with a dramatically better level of service than today's middling frequencies. Now, as it turns out, the Broad Street line already does have one branch, known as the Ridge Spur, which diverges from the main line north of the city center to travel to the east, providing additional East City Center connections at 2 different stations. This branch currently operates short trains with limited hours, but it's quite important for providing additional connectivity to Philly's other subway lines. The first of these is the PATCO speed line, which you might argue isn't really a Philly line at all, since most of its length is in suburban New Jersey across the Delaware River, and because it isn't run by SEPTA. But as you know, the lay of the land in RM transit world is that when you're an integrated, interconnected transit system, you are one transit system. PATCO runs a total of 23 kilometers with 13 stations southeast from Center City, on a route that's mostly on elevated structures and berms through suburban areas, presenting an interesting alternative view of what suburban rail in the US might have looked like. And interestingly, it actually runs 24 hours a day, albeit with limited overnight service. Once it reaches Camden, New Jersey, across the Delaware River from Philly, it dips underground to serve 2 subway stations before crossing the Delaware River on the lower level of the Ben Franklin Bridge, before passing back underground and serving 4 stations to the east and the south of Center City, Philadelphia, as well as connecting to the Ridge Spur. And as it turns out, there was historically a track connection between the Broad Street line's Ridge Spur and PATCO, allowing trains to be shuttled back and forth, though it's not used today. What really makes PATCO special, though, is, well, its speed. Trains are able to go up to 105 kilometers per hour, and since there are only 13 stations on the over 20 kilometer long route, there's quite large gaps between stations where trains can actually get up to speed. And as it turns out, the alignment is actually designed for much higher speeds. Interestingly, in the past, some peak period commuter services actually even ran express past some stations, something which cities in China have started to do on some of their new express lines. Trains on PATCO run on standard gauge and have a 750-volt DC third rail. They're quite similar in size to the Broad Street subway cars, but with a commuter-oriented seating layout and fewer doors. In many ways, PATCO reminds me of Montreal's REM. It's a fast suburban rail service which departs the city center to run across a bridge to suburban areas at high speed. And PATCO actually had one of the world's first automatic train operation systems, which is the predecessor to the automated technology that runs systems like the Vancouver SkyTrain and Montreal's REM. Philly's final subway line is actually mostly elevated, and that's the 21-kilometer 28 station Market Frankfurt line, often just called the L because such a huge portion of it runs on elevated viaducts. And in many ways, Philadelphia makes up the trifecta of old-fashioned elevated rail that you still see with Chicago, New York, and, well, yes, Philly. The route runs from the 69th Street Transportation Center in the west along Market Street through West Philadelphia, where it's elevated before dipping underground near University City to operate as a subway. The line passes 30th Street Station, Philadelphia's major intercity rail station, before passing under the Schuylkill River, connecting with the Broad Street line at City Hall and PATCO, as well as the Ridge Spur at 8th and Market. Shortly thereafter, the line pops above ground to run a short distance in the middle of a highway before going elevated and running north then east to Frankfurt. While the trains on the Market Frankfurt line pull power from a 700-volt DC third rail and actually operate on the rather unique Pennsylvania trolley gauge, they're actually rather small at just 2.7 meters wide and 6 cars long, only about 100 meters. But despite that, this is Philly's busiest train line, with over 100,000 daily riders, and like other lines in the city, it used to have 24-hour service. And while this video won't talk about the Philadelphia trolley system, I do think it's worth noting that at the 69th Street Transportation Center, the Market Frankfurt line connects with the two suburban trolley routes. And entering Center City, the Market Frankfurt line actually shares a quad-track tunnel that's operated as local trolleys and express subway. And of course the trolleys do use the same gauge as this rapid transit line. If you want to hear more about them, then you should watch my previous video on Philly's trolleys. In very exciting news from just a few weeks ago, SEPTA announced that they'd awarded the contract for new trains for the Market Frankfurt line to Hitachi, who are also building new trains for the DC Metro and the Ontario line in Toronto. Hitachi created a rather stunning design for the new trains, which will be partially walkthrough, some of the first in the US. They'll also have modern digital wayfinding screens in addition to offset doors for additional capacity, all while being what appears to be some of the nicest trains on the continent. In the future, the Market Frankfurt line is likely to also be teed up for a short extension, since just another 1.5 kilometers of elevated track from Frankfurt Transportation Center would take it up to the Broad Street Subway's Roosevelt Boulevard extension, which will create this sort of nice suburban out-of-city center connection that you already see in a number of places in the Philly region. As it turns out, there is actually one more rapid transit line in Philly, and that's the Norristown High Speed Line, which is extremely odd. This line is a 22-station, 22-kilometer standard gauge 630-volt DC-powered interurban railway, which extends to Norristown, northwest of Philly, from the 69th Street Transportation Center, where there are naturally connections to the Market Frankfurt line. The high-speed line has an entirely grade-separated route made up of surface and elevated trackage, and it crosses the Schuylkill River at the north end to actually connect into Norristown, with a single-track bridge. What makes the high-speed line so odd are its rolling stock and service. Trains operated are high-floor, single-car tram-like units, where passengers pay their fare on board, kind of like a bus. Even weirder, they're actually powered by a third rail as opposed to overhead lines, and historically they could operate at well over 100 kilometers per hour, giving the line its name. In recent years, there's actually been a lot of discussion about extending the line to the King of Prussia area with a new branch. However, the extreme cost, over-engineering, and low ridership for that project has made it a non-starter, and it currently appears to be on ice. The other major rail mode in Philly is the enormous suburban rail system, which is so complex and features so many lines that I can't hope to cover in complete detail in this video, so make sure to subscribe for a future one on that. Almost unique in North America, the entirety of Philly's suburban rail network is electrified with 12 kilovolt AC overhead lines, and the network services extend a total of 450 kilometers serving 155 stations, forming a true regional backbone for all of southeastern Pennsylvania. The core of the network is the City Center Commuter Connection Tunnel, a European-style cross-city tunnel built in the 1970s which allowed the Pennsylvania Railroad and Reading suburban networks to be interconnected, sort of like S-train networks in Europe. And the tunnel itself is incredibly impressive, with 4 tracks and 2 major stations at Suburban and Jefferson. Suburban is actually the location of the old Pennsylvania Railroad's Stub End Underground Terminal, while Jefferson is a short distance away from the old Reading Terminal, the approach to which can still easily be seen on Philadelphia's urban landscape. Unfortunately, while the commuter tunnel, as it's known, was the right infrastructure to build, not all of the supporting infrastructure was built. Many stations still have low-level platforms, requiring people to ascend stairs to get up to the high floors of the trains. Train service isn't at S-Bahn-like levels, with trains every couple of minutes, and fare policy just doesn't make sense. People will often choose to take a bus over the same route that a regional train travels because it's less expensive. Fortunately, some infrastructure upgrades, policy changes, and things like fare parity with rapid transit could overnight make Philly's suburban rail network one of the best in the world. Today, the structure of the network is really interesting. On the historic Reading side of the network, there are the Norristown, Chestnut Hill East, Fox Chase, West Trenton, Warminster, and Doylestown lines, while on the PRR side you have the Wawa, Kinwood, and Chestnut Hill West lines. There is also the Northeast Corridor, which Amtrak trains run through using the lower level of 30th Street Station, but which SEPTA trains actually operate radially out onto, with trains heading as far as Trenton and Newark. There is also the rather noteworthy electrified line to Harrisburg, where SEPTA trains operate out to Thorndale. There is also the airport line, which is really interesting because it features several stations at the different terminals and provides direct electric rail service from the airport to the city center, which is painfully rare in North America. I do want to briefly point out that there are a ton of interconnections between the suburban rail and the rapid transit. 30th Street, Suburban, and Jefferson are all served by the Market Frankfurt line, while Suburban and Fern Rock are both served by the Broad Street line. North Philadelphia is also particularly interesting because it provides a connection to both the Broad Street line, but also the possibility of a walking connection to North Broad on the Reading lines. While it's unfortunate that most branches don't receive very frequent service, in the long term, the 4 tracks through the city center tunnel should allow every line to operate every 7 minutes all day long. Fortunately, since a lot of lines run through Temple University, Penn Medicine, and Wayne Junction, you do kind of get the experience of high-frequency service between these stations and Center City. And in addition, services do through run, with services running between the airport and Warminster, Thorndale and Doylestown, Chestnut Hill East and Trenton, Fox Chase and Chestnut Hill West, West Trenton and Wawa, and Norristown and Wilmington. There are also plans being developed to finally turn the suburban rail network into a frequent system, which break down into creating a core every 15-minute route from Fern Rock to Penn Medicine, and then doing something similar on a couple other key corridors, creating another layer of lower frequency long-distance express trains over top of that. Of course, this would all be aided by modern rolling stock with more doors and a more modern look, and of course with only high-level level boarding, akin to what you see on the London Overground or the Berlin S-Bahn. And fortunately, SEPTA is actually interested in these types of trains, which might just end up being the latest in the recent trend of modern equipment acquisitions that the agency has been undertaking, from the Market Frankfurt line to the new trolleys. Now, before I close things out, I do need to mention 2 very interesting New Jersey transit lines which are relevant to Philadelphia, and which of course naturally interconnect with the other services in the city. The first of these is the New Jersey Transit Atlantic City line, which runs from 30th Street Station in Philly to Atlantic City in New Jersey, connecting with and running alongside PATCO for part of its route. The Atlantic City line was once upon a time, like so many lines in the northeast of the US, electrified, but sadly these days it's entirely run with diesel-pulled trains. However, on the bright side, the service is at least an all-day one, with trains operating about every hour or 2. And then there is the River Line, which is a really interesting diesel multiple unit interurban service which runs from Trenton, where connections can be made to Amtrak as well as to SEPTA services, south down to Camden, connecting with the Atlantic City line on the way. Within Camden, you can connect to PATCO, and the line also has extremely weird on-street diesel multiple unit operations, which you don't usually associate with this type of rail mode. The River Line is really interesting because it's a nice model for what the diesel interurban lines that we're starting to see in places like Ontario, California, and Texas could actually look like, with multiple connections along their length, regular service, and urban integration. And the River Line itself might actually be expanded, with part of its infrastructure in Camden being used for our modern Glassboro-Camden line, which would connect the city to the south with regular service akin to that seen on the rest of the River Line. Suffice to say, Philly is a region filled with railways, from electric trolleys to subways and through running suburban rail. Not to mention, of course, both diesel and electric interurban routes. There are few cities with as storied and interesting railway networks, and few cities with quite the same potential as Philadelphia. Thanks for watching.